Hi guys, it's Troy at the Full Setup, back with another benchmark review. Now for my last benchmark we tested the Ryzen 2600 and GTX 1660's outstanding 1080p performance. But for today's video it's time to test Intel's direct competing CPU, the i5-8400. So I will be benchmarking the GTX 1660 and the i5-8400 at 1080p low to ultra settings. I will be testing 11 games for you today with a mix of stock and overclock results for you, and over the next few weeks I will also be benchmarking 1440p and ultra wide performance. So if you want to see those videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And as another huge thank you to all of you, I'm also running another competition this month, and you can have the chance to win a silent RGB mechanical keyboard and matching mouse from the lovely guys and girls at Gamemax, and an XL RGB gaming surface from the people over at Banggood. And you can find out how to enter at the end of the video. As for the GTX 1660, I'm using the super stocky EVGA XC Black with 6GB of GDDR5. This 1660 has a maximum boost rating of 1785 MHz, but as you can see on screen, out of the box boosts are much higher if you keep the card nice and cool. Now there is a full specification list of the system that I'm using today in the description for you, but I will just give you a brief overview of the system. Now I'm using an i5-8400 as already mentioned, and as you can see it's running at 3.8 GHz, and that is its all-core turbo. You do not need to do anything to make it run at that all-core turbo. You just plug the CPU in and it goes at 3.8 GHz, not the 2.8 GHz that a lot of you think it is. Now I'm pairing this CPU with 16GB of 2666 MHz DDR4, and I'm running it on an ASRock B360M Pro 4 motherboard. Before we start with the review, I would like to thank today's sponsor GVG Mall. Now I'm sure you're like myself and you have spent many an hour planning your dream PC builds, only to be left crying when you have to add your Windows operating system at over £100, which normally results in a CPU or GPU downgrade. Well, not anymore. GVG Mall offers some of the best pricing on Windows 10 Pro license keys, and they have kindly given me a 20% discount code to share with you. The reason they're able to offer Windows so cheap is that they do not provide you with any physical media and only provide you with a license key. But don't worry, you can download the installer from Microsoft's website, then simply install Windows on a USB stick and you are good to go. As well as Windows and Office, GVG Mall also offers some great prices on games too, and there is a link to their website in the description. Let's start with stock versus overclock performance then. Now some of the other Turing graphics cards that I've been reviewing have generally been OC models, meaning that I wasn't able to add as much to the overclock, so for most of those overclocks I was adding about 100 MHz to the core. Now I always like to do an overclock that all of you can achieve, so I suggest you start with 100 MHz, but because this GTX 1660 is a little downclocked, I actually added 150 MHz to the core. Now as for the memory, with GDDR5 you should have no problem adding 500 MHz to the memory. Now you may be able to add a little bit more, but I just know from all of the Nvidia graphics cards I reviewed for the last few years, adding 500 MHz to the memory has been an absolute cinch. Now seeming as we reviewed the Ryzen 2600 just over a week ago, I thought we would include those scores today as well. So we're going to compare them directly to the i5-8400. For Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we are running at ultra settings with SMAA. Now with the i5-8400 plus the GTX 1660 at stock, we have a minimum of 61 and an average of 77 frames per second. Now when we're running the Ryzen 2600 at stock and also with a stock GPU, we have a minimum of 59 and an average of 71 frames per second. Running the i5-8400 with an overclocked GTX 1660 gives a minimum of 65 and an average of 84 frames per second. Running the Ryzen 2600 at 4.2 GHz but also running an overclocked GTX 1660 gives a minimum of 60 and an average of 78 frames per second. Far Cry New Dawn also at ultra settings, but we've upped it to TAA. Now for the 8400 plus the 1660 at stock, we have a minimum of 63 and an average of 78 frames per second. Running the Ryzen system all at stock, we have a minimum of 63 and an average of 79 frames per second. Running the i5-8400 plus an overclocked graphics card gives us a minimum of 66 and an average of 83 frames per second. Running the Ryzen 2600 system completely overclocked, we have a minimum of 71 and an average of 87 frames per second. Shadow of War also at ultra settings with TAA. For the 8400 stock config, we have a minimum of 42 and an average of 72 frames per second. For the Ryzen at stock, we have a minimum of 40 and an average of 68 frames per second. Overclocking the GPU with the i5-8400 gives us a minimum of 46 and an average of 79 frames per second. And finally, running the Ryzen system at 4.2 GHz with an overclocked GPU gives a minimum of 44 and an average of 75 frames per second. So there was the stock versus overclock performance then, and I'm going to talk a little bit more at the end of the video about the i5-8400 versus the Ryzen 2600 with this graphics card. But for the rest of the video, we are just going to focus on gameplay footage. But one thing you're going to notice is that the graphics card is still overclocked. And as I explain in all of my videos, the reason is because I use Nvidia Shadow to record. So basically, we're losing about 5 frames per second from recording, but we're also gaining about 5 frames per second from overclocking. So what you're actually seeing here on screen right now is much closer to stock performance than it is overclock performance. And as you can see here, it has no troubles running Devil May Cry 5 at ultra settings. It's really making use of my high refresh rate panel, and this is a very easy game to run. Moving on to PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds then. Now, as always, we start with running the game at the settings I like to play. These are sort of like competitive settings. So what I do is I set everything to low, but I keep view distance set to ultra, so I can sort of see everything around me, can see players in the distance, but get very high frame rate from it indeed. And to be honest, I do think the game still looks alright even at mostly all low settings, and it has no issues maxing out my high refresh rate panel. Even though there are some bottlenecks caused by the CPU, the frame rates are always extremely high. Moving up to ultra settings, and you can see we're still running at very good frame rates. For the most, you're going to be running between about 80 and 90 frames per second. But as you get further into the round and the map gets smaller, once it's getting quite tight and you've got a few teams going after each other, you will see some frame rate dips around about the 70 frames per second mark, but it still runs the game incredibly well at ultra settings. Moving on to Metro Exodus then. Now, all my testing so far on the channel has been at DirectX 12, but we're running at DirectX 11 today. And the reason is it's nothing to do with the system itself, with the CPU or the GPU. The reason I'm running at DirectX 11 is I was having quite a few crashes when I had River Tuner open when I was running at DirectX 12, and the crashes were happening more when I was overclocking it. And I mean, just even a slight overclock, I dropped the overclock right down and it was still crashing. So as soon as I tinkered with anything in Msi Afterburner at DirectX 12, I was having some issues. Now, I did do a few tests at stock at both DirectX 11 and 12, and I really didn't notice that much of a difference. Now, I'm not saying you won't notice a difference, I'm just saying that I didn't. So we're running at DirectX 11. Now, this game can run fine on this graphics card at ultra settings. At the beginning of the game, you'll see very high frame rate. But when you are getting to more demanding locations like the desert location that a lot of you are asking for me to test, it's better to run it at high settings because you are going to see drops down to the 60 FPS mark. But the choice is yours really. The game does still run fine at ultra settings. Moving on to Apex Legends. Now, sadly, since Season 1 dropped and since making this video, from when I got the footage for this video, the frame rate cap is back on that caps you to your monitor's refresh rate. Both the fix that you would do in Origin and the fix you would do in the video control panel from when the game launched does not work. So sadly, I am locked to 144 frames per second. But please do let me know when there is a fix, because I will make a separate Apex Legends video for you where I will test a whole range of settings for you. But even with the frame rate cap on at 144 frames per second, this game is buttery smooth, absolutely silky smooth, and it runs extremely well at low settings. And once the frame rate caps off, you will actually see frame rates going up to 200 frames per second. Cranking these settings up to very high, and obviously you're going to get a dip in performance, but again, it's always running between that sort of 80 to 100 frames per second mark. And again, gameplay is still buttery smooth even at this frame rate. But one thing you will find in more intensive areas when there's lots of teams fighting each other, a bit like PUBG, you're going to see those dips down to the sort of 60-70 frames per second mark. Moving on to Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now, as I explained in the previous video, you can run this game with this configuration, with this graphics card at ultra high settings. I just think it runs better at very high settings, and I also have the AA set to medium. Now, there is a couple of extra things you could do to get some more performance out of this system. I know a lot of you recommend turning off volumetric clouds, and that definitely does give a performance boost. To be honest, what I would probably actually do if I was you is just set it to ultra high and then just turn a few things off until it gets to the frame rate that you like versus the visuals that you like. But one thing that's a concern compared to when I did the testing on the Ryzen 2600 is the CPU usage. I mean, this game runs much better on Ryzen. As you can see here, the i5-8400, the CPU usage is getting pegged to 100% quite often. And from that, you are going to see some stutters and you are going to see some frame rate dips. So there were the benchmarks then, and the i5-8400 and the GTX 1660 are a fantastic pair for 1080p gaming. If you're cranking everything up to ultra, for most games you're going to be running above 60 frames per second. Now if you're like myself and you like to play shooters at all low settings so you can get that maximum frame rate and play on high refresh rate monitors, this is also a very good combo as well. Now when it comes to choosing whether you're going to pair this GPU with the Ryzen 2600 or the i5-8400, honestly, it wouldn't make a difference. Just build the system that comes out the cheapest. The performance is going to be on par. You're going to have some games where the Ryzen performs just a tiny little bit better, and you're going to have some games where the 8400 just performs a tiny little bit better. There really is nothing in it. If I had to decide, I would probably still go Intel. I do believe that Intel is better once you're trying to push those higher refresh rates. But for you, I'd probably tell you to go with the Ryzen because obviously you've got the upgradability to Ryzen 3000 CPUs. But I'd be really interested on your thoughts on that in the description below. So what are my thoughts of the GTX 1660 then? Well, I'm going to keep this a little bit shorter than in my last video because I went on a huge waffle. But I still stand by what I said in my last video, and if you don't agree with me or you maybe want some more information, maybe go check that video out. But I do think the GTX 1660 for £200 is a very good graphics card indeed. It is not a replacement for a GTX 1060, RX 480 or 580. As I mentioned, you shouldn't be upgrading mid-range graphics cards every generation. And if you were, you should be looking at the graphics card that is replacing those cards, which is either the GTX 1660 Ti or the RTX 2060, which has just had a discount in the UK, making that graphics card an even better buy. For me, I always look at the GTX 1660 as a replacement for the 1063GB, so you're getting double the VRAM and you're getting better performance. This is a perfect card for anyone that's still on maybe a GTX 960 or 970, very good upgrade indeed, or even older like something like a 750 Ti. But that is just my opinion. I mean, we're all welcome to our own opinion. You do not have to agree with me. And again, I'd be very interested on what your thoughts are on this graphics card in the comment section below. Moving over to the competition then, well, this is an international competition and anyone can enter, and it finishes on April the 17th. Now to enter, you only really have to do two things. You need to make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you get notifications on all my great upcoming content. Then you need to go over to my Discord server, and there is a link in the description for my server. And over there you will see there is a competition server. Now all you need to do is just leave a comment in there saying enter. If you do want to have a discussion, please go on to one of the other channels and plenty of people will help you out with any PC build questions. Anyway, that's it from me today. If you like the waffle, give me a waffle. If you didn't like the waffle, give me some shit in the comment section. Make sure you enter that competition and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll be back with some more videos very soon.